Hello everybody, my name is Manues. Welcome to another Eternal Essentials. Today I want to talk about all things power, basically all the power cards in the game. I've prepared something here. Built a deck basically, including all the power related cards in the game. And I want to go over them, talk a bit about them, about their role, about their quality and their impact in deck building, and how to properly use them and implement them into decks. Also as a preparation for a follow-up video where I talk a bit more about power bases and show some decks and their power bases and explain a bit how to properly build power bases for certain decks and certain influence and curve requirements, basically to help people better understand how to properly build power bases with the right influence and amounts of power for their decks in the future, especially since I feel like this is kind of a weakness of the majority of the community right now. There is a certain lack of understanding of these concepts, especially for people that come from backgrounds like Hearthstone and Yu-Gi-Oh, for example, where there are no power bases, or people that simply don't have much experience with card games in general. And I think properly understanding power and influence in this game is essential to building and tuning decks properly and succeeding constantly, because if your power base is fundamentally flawed and dysfunctional, it will cost you a lot of win percentage in the long run. So I kind of made it my mission to help people get a better grasp on all things power. So today we're going to start with talking about all the power cards, and in a future video I will talk about power bases more specifically. So first of all, I'm just going to go through it like casting cost wise, the way the deck builder sorts it, because there's no other way to sort it and I found it's the easiest way. So first we have Initiate of the Sands. One thing that I think that people tendentially do with Initiate of the Sands is they think they can skimp quite a lot on power when adding the card to your deck, which is most of the time wrong, because the card first of all is unreliable as a power source, because it might get silenced or killed, and then if your deck runs insufficient power, you basically are crippled and lose the game because the opponent killed your 1-drop. That shouldn't happen. Also, if you're not running enough power, this is replacing a power drop rather than accelerating you, and the goal of this is to have 3 power on turn 2 and 4 power on turn 3 and 5 power on turn 4, and not have 3 power on turn 4 plus Initiate of the Sands that gets you to 4. Then you're definitely not properly utilizing Initiate of the Sands. Sure, you can maybe play 1 power less in a deck with Initiate of the Sands than you would play in a deck without, but that's about it basically, because and that also depends on how high your curve goes. Obviously, if your curve only goes up to 4, you can definitely play 1 power less than you would without Initiate of the Sands. But if your curve goes even up to 5 or 6, in more mid-range decks that try to use it to ramp into their 5-drops, for example, then you don't really want to skim much on power, because you basically have to hit your first 4 or 5 power drops in addition to Initiate for Initiate to properly accelerate you, ramp you into stuff. And also Initiate doesn't give you influence, so you also need to have enough power in your deck to get the critical influence requirements for your colors, especially in multi-faction decks. But yeah, all in all, it's a pretty powerful card. I think the card is kind of underrated right now, especially in Limited. I get so many late and last pick Initiate of the Sands, and I think that's just wrong, because the units in the game are costed relative to their stats and statted relative to their cost. So getting a 4-drop into play on turn 3 is a significant advantage. Playing a Titan on turn 3 is so much more powerful and impactful than a Titan on turn 4. Granted, it's still powerful on turn 4 because it's the most aggressively statted unit in the game, but in general, playing a drop 1 turn earlier than they are supposed to from their casting cost, that gives you a pretty good board advantage. And if you do that 2 or 3 turns in a row, then suddenly your board is way ahead on your opponent's board, because while they play a 3-drop, you play a 4-drop. After they play a 4-drop, you play a 5-drop, and so on. You're always one step ahead of your opponent, and if your units are powerful enough to have stats that reflect that, that is going to snowball in an advantage, and that applies in draft as well as in constructed. And that is why historically this type of effect is pretty powerful in these games, and has been a cornerstone of the color in Magic that contains this type of effect, and is a widely played, constructed and limited staple, usually being picked very highly. Like Initiate of the Sands type cards are usually among the best commons and first pick commons in their color in Magic, for example, and I don't think there's much reason for it to be different here, because in regards to those dynamics, Eternally works exactly the same. Units cost are relative to their stats, and their stats are relative to their cost, and cheating units into play a turn earlier than they're supposed to gives you an advantage in terms of stats on board. And yeah, I think people should give this guy more of a chance, especially in limited. It's really powerful to get stuff like in Illusion, get that Serpent Trainer out on turn 3 on the Blaze. Makes it much harder for your opponent to muster a block or a removal to stop it, and already having the 2 snakes on turn 4 rather than on turn 5 is a big deal, for example, and many other things. Next we have Seek Power. This is basically a different version of Diplomatic Seal. It's basically more of a power card than a regular card. Sure, it's a spell and it can be stopped by backlash and stuff like that, but effectively it's a power that says enter play depleted, and lets you choose what sigil it wants to turn into, unlike Diplomatic Seal, which doesn't enter play depleted but only lets you choose the sigil it wants to be in the early game, and later on it just doesn't provide anything anymore. This is basically the late game version of Seal. Like early on Seal is better, later on Seek Power is better because it still gives you influence. This is tailor-made for slower decks that have nothing to do on turn 1, that have spots in their curve where they have a spare power, can play it, or so they can like set it up prior, so you basically in the turn you actually need the power. It is not even depleted, which basically makes it a bit better than an actually depleted power, because you can set it up earlier. It's a bit more flexible than if it would exactly be what I described it as in terms of a power, so that's nice. Also slightly thins your deck, which is not particularly relevant, even less so in this game, because the deck doesn't get shuffled after you search for a sigil, so you cannot like put something back on top with second sight and then Seek Power to shuffle it away and stuff. These things don't work. I don't exactly know, to be honest, how it works, because I guess it's kind of randomly decided. Like if you basically have 5 primal sigils in your deck and you pick a primal sigil with Seek Power, I would assume it just basically randomly decides which of the 5 primal sigils from your deck it gives you, so basically where it takes it out of the deck. So it might be the one closest to you, so the next one that you could draw into, making the thinning effect maximum, but it could also just be like the primal sigil that's lowest in the deck and might not affect the game at all. And I think the fact that it doesn't shuffle makes the thinning effect a bit weaker, because basically due to the deck not being randomized, the effect of one sigil less is often less impactful, but maybe I'm just thinking about it wrong. Maybe it just doesn't matter. I'm not entirely sure. If someone has a clearer understanding of it, let me know. You can kind of like get lost in thinking about it and trying to like wrap your head around if it makes a difference, and if not, and how exactly. But yeah, this card is a really great influence fixer, great for especially for 3-color decks. Also really nice for slower 2-color decks with heavy influences and or decks that simply can afford to run it without much downside, because anything, even in a low requirement 2-faction deck that fixes your power base is great, since you just want to reduce the variance as much as possible, and every game that you don't have to automatically lose because you redrew into a single faction hand is great, because every multi-faction card that you can play that gives you multiple influences like Seek Power or Diplomatic Seal reduces the chance of getting these opening hands that are color screwed and make for a non-game. So whenever you can afford to run this card, play it. It's a great addition to any power base, no matter how low its requirements are, if the deck is slow enough to afford Seek Power. The one big downside basically is that it's not actually a power card, so you can only play it if you want more than 25 power in your deck, because you have to play it in addition to the minimum of 25 power, which is most certainly another downside and cost of the card to balance it a bit, because you basically only get access to this great fixer if you are willing to run more than a minimum power. Otherwise you have to make do with a more limited amount of power fixing, basically. Next we have the 5 favors. They are also another great way to play additional power past the 25, usually for decks that are not that aggressive, because in aggressive decks you don't want to spend your second turn searching, drawing a sigil. You want to spend it deploying your board. But in control decks, cards like Eileen's Favor are really nice. It basically is a power that in addition sets up a shield for the next burn spell or whatever effect the opponent might target you with. It's like really nice value if you basically get the value of half a card added to your power, and you basically if you look at it that way, you basically have a sigil. Compared to a regular sigil, you have a sigil that enters play depleted, and you spend the second power on the effect. So basically you have a downgraded sigil plus a 1 power spell all in one card that overall costs you 2 cards and is a pretty good deal, since giving yourself an Aegis for 1 power and basically having your sigil effectively be depleted when you play it is a pretty good deal for having both in one card. It's effectively card advantage, which makes these things really nice. And the way the redraw system works, that you at least have 2 power cards or more in your hand after a redraw, makes these basically count as full power in a deck, because you will always be able to have hands that are able to cast them, which makes all the 1 and 2 cost power givers worth the same in terms of power in a deck as sigil. It makes them slower, but they are still like, if you have an opening hand with a favor and 2 power, that's just a slower version of 3 power cards. And as long as your deck can afford to spend tempo power on searching sigils, it is better to have these in your deck than additional power cards, because you get value, and that prevents flood or makes flood less impactful. So favors are really great. The best ones are Eileen's Favor, Talia's Favor, and Vera's Favor, because those 3 generate actual value. This usually that's potentially trades with an opposing spell. Sometimes only with an effect, then it's a bit weaker, like if an Argent Port Instigator procs it, it's definitely less impactful if compared to if it eats a torch. Talia's Favor is great because it actually produces a unit. If your deck has enough ways to turn this unit into a relevant card through Obelisk and Shimmer Pack and stuff, then you're also basically getting real card advantage, because you get 2 cards in one. You get a body and a power. Same with Vara's Favor. it gives you a power and potentially lets you trade with a card from your opponent, be it a weapon like an Auric Runehammer or an X1 unit, for example. So these three can generate like almost hard 2-for-1s, while Caleb's Favor just gives you some incremental advantage, the same as Roland's Favor, basically just giving you some life or dealing some damage to the opponent, which is not worth a full card, but still better than a regular sigil if you don't mind spending the 2 power on it. Roland's Favor is slightly better than Caleb's Favor in the sense that in conjunction with weapons it can actually indirectly translate into card advantage because you get to use the weapon twice rather than once thanks to Roland's Favor, while Caleb's Favor basically always is only like incremental advantage and can rarely translate into actual card advantage. Like the only thing I can think of is if you get to like finish off a weapon with it, basically. Other than that, it doesn't really do much. Like it kind of nicely trades with an Eileen's Favor, but by that point you're also not trading against the full card, you're only trading against value gained from a favor that already gained your opponent a full card in the power. But yeah, all in all the favors are pretty good if your deck can afford them. Next we have the new Find a Way. Pretty good power enabler for slow decks. It doesn't help you curve out because the sigils you search up are depleted, but in decks like Big Combre and multi-faction controls it's really nice to fix influence bases for 3 or 4 color decks, and also help you get to really high power amounts without running too many base power cards that get you flooded easier, and also generates card advantage because you get 2 cards for the cost of 1. All it takes is some time because you have to spend 2 for each to search it, and it enters play depleted, basically making each of the 2 power cards you get cost you 3 power, which is kind of a lot, but if your deck can take it, like Big Combre or slower control decks that can make up for power losses with cards like Harsh Rule, it's a great way to feed their mana hungry, their power hungry base curves without running the risk of either having not enough power or not enough business spells. Next we have Voice of the Speaker. Don't want to talk much about your card, doesn't really have any use right now. Theoretically can produce a lot of card advantage and do a similar thing as Find a Way. Problem is its body of 2-1 is almost irrelevant, it doesn't really block an attack well. It's very fragile to removal if the opponent wants to deny you the effect, and then you trade 1 for 1, and it's just very unreliable, and usually if you want an effect like that you're gonna look for Find a Way. So next we have Amber Acolyte, another really great power enabler, a bit weaker than Favor in terms of guaranteeing proper power flow in the beginning, because there's these hands where you have 2 power and an Amber Acolyte, and if you never draw that 3rd power in time, the Amber Acolyte is not worth anything. So keep in mind, Acolyte is not quite a full power card. Basically, I would say if you add 4 Acolytes to your deck, you can probably replace 3 power cards. You can count it as like adding 3 power cards to your deck maybe, because most of the time, especially if you have other ways to guarantee to hit 3 power and have a fairly high amount to at least get to 3, then Acolyte gets close to being equal to a regular power card, but keep in mind there's always the risk of having 2 power and an Acolyte and not finding the 3rd power before it's too late and then just dying with an Acolyte in hand, that if it would have been a Favor, a Seek Power, or a regular power card would have been enough to get in the game and interact with the opponent. So be aware of that. If you add 3+ power searches, that they only help you hit higher power requirements and are not fully equal to a regular power card. But yeah, probably 4 Acolyte equal 3 regular power cards. Next we have Privilege of Rank, basically the same thing as Ember Acolyte. It is a bit better in the sense that there is some ways to enable it that also cost 2. Like if you play 4 Privilege of Rank and 4 Herald Song in your deck, Privilege of Rank is closer to helping you hit early power drops than Acolyte, because they will have various hands where you can just go turn 2 Herald Song, discard Privilege of Rank to cast it, and it also helps you to hit the 3rd power. So basically, while Acolyte is 2 to 3 power, like a playset of Acolytes in your deck is 2 to 3 at least 2, probably 3 power worth of cards added to your power base. Privilege of Rank is like 3 to 4, depending on how many ways you have to hit it early. Another way is Spore Folk to mill it on turn 2 with Spore Folk, which also is considered discarding and lets you cast it. So if you're running some Cauldron 3 faction deck, for example, with Herald Song and Spore Folk, Privilege of Rank almost counts. Each Privilege of Rank almost counts as not only 1, but even close to 2 power cards. So you should keep that in mind while building your power base in your deck. And also balance that towards how much power you need maximum, because this definitely helps you reach that 6, 7, 8 drop, for example. Index cards like this that give you 2 power, same as Find a Way, are for decks that really want to hit 6, 7, 8 power or even more in games. And you couldn't do that naturally with just running regular 1-for-1 power cards. You need things that give you multiple power cards to get there reliably. Next we have Secret Pages. That's another interesting card, and the only effect similar to Initiate of the Sands, but much slower. First of all, investing 1 power and turn 1, where you often don't do anything anyway, is much better, and also getting the effect from turn 2 on, than spending your entire 3rd turn, which is usually a turn that you have to interact with your opponent to not fall behind, to jump from 3 to 5 is much worse than jumping from 1 to 3 and then to 4, 5, 6, while this only jumps from 3 to 5, 6, 7, which is much less beneficial, which is why there's not so many decks that actually want this effect. But it can be kind of nice in control decks like the big combo deck that I just recorded with, to jump to those critical 5 drops, especially get to turn 4 Harsh Rule, because Initiate of the Sands is really bad if your plan is to wipe the board with Harsh Rule, and Secret Pages works much better there. And the fact that it's a fast spell has some nice upsides in conjunction with other ambush and fast spell cards. But yeah, this card is not played too much currently, simply because of spending your entire 3rd turn, or even on turn 4 spending 3 of your 4 power on an effect like that doesn't impact the board and doesn't give you a huge advantage either, is mostly just feasible to jump to a turn 4 Harsh Rule. That's the only thing that can basically make up for the tempo and board advantage loss that Secret Pages provides by simply just resetting the board the turn after. Otherwise it just falls so far behind that playing a 5 drop on turn 4 is not going to be good enough to make up for that usually. But it's also an influence fixer, which can be relevant and is nice in multi-faction decks. Next we have Spire Triplane. Not much to say here. Card is pretty bad. 3-2 is poor stats on a 3 drop. Sure, if it attacks and then dies or trades, you at least get a Justice Sigil, but yeah, it's just not very good, and that's the reason why you don't see it much. It's kind of okay-ish in Limited, but even there it's not very good, especially because you also would need to have a deck with a high enough curve and powerful enough cards to actually benefit from these extra Justice Sigils that you draw to ramp you up to 7, 8 power to drop something powerful, which is also risky, because if you don't have Triplane providing you enough power, then you might have these high drops stranded in your hand. Cards just, yeah, not good. Next we have Minotaur Ambassador. Card is kind of nice in the sense that it's card advantage. You basically get 3 cards for 1, a 3/5 body, and 2 power. The problem is that it's not like that relevant card advantage, because you're basically jumping from like 6 to 9 on your curve, and there's not even really any 9 drops that you want to play in the game. And sure, if you don't have the 9's power drop, it jumps you from 6 to 8 and lets you drop that 8 drop on turn 7, or that 9 drop on turn 7, but that is both not very likely in limited and in draft. I guess it kind of can have some appeal in like these big decks, like some control decks and big combo, but the problem is you can only run so many high-end cards, and I rather run my Mystic Ascendants and Martial Ironthorns in these slots than Minotaur Ambassador, which is why I'm looking at cards like Find a Way to get a similar effect early, rather than have like a 6 cost card in my hand early and I might not find that 6 power and can't even play it to begin with, for example, since this card basically does not really allow you to skimp on power at all, while Find a Way lets you play a couple of sigils less, since each Find a Way gives you 2 sigils, and the fact that it costs 2 guarantees that you can always cast it with any opening hand that you get.